Far Cry Primal is the setting is very different than previous Far Cry's. Why Prehistoric Times?
Well, with the Prehistoric Times, we saw it as a really good opportunity to set the game in there. It's actually the first frontier for man. It's a time that was much more brutal, and man had to fight for survival every day. He had to climb on top of the food chain. He was really at the bottom of it. So I think for us, like when we were looking into a new exciting setting for Far Cry, we thought that was perfect. This is exactly where we want to go. So this is really why we chose that setting.
All right, that's cool. Why did you go for a character that knew the environment this time instead of being just a fish out of water like in previous games? Because they told that in the other Far Cry's, the characters were always strangers to their environment. This one knows everything around him and he's pretty used to it. So why go that route this time?
Well, if he didn't know that, like how to get around, he'd probably be dead. Back then it was a lot more brutal. So that's why we wanted a character that knew how to gather food, how to defend himself, and really when you start the game, even though you know how to interact with the world and all that, you sort of lose everything. Like your tribe gets destroyed, and you really have to fight for survival. So putting just a person who's not able to defend themselves in that setting would have been a bit wouldn't have really worked with what we wanted. So I guess that's why we went with that.
Okay. The setting is very different than previous Far Cry's. Why Prehistoric Times?
Well, with the Prehistoric Times, we saw it as a really good opportunity to set the game in there. It's actually the first frontier for man. It's a time that was much more brutal, and man had to fight for survival every day. He had to climb on top of the food chain. He was really at the bottom of it. So I think for us, like when we were looking into a new exciting setting for Far Cry, we thought that was perfect. This is exactly where we want to go. So this is really why we chose that setting.
What makes a Far Cry game now?
Well, Far Cry, it's a lot more than just about guns for us. It's about a world that's brutal, a world that's savage. It's about crazy, colorful characters that you'll get to meet as you wander through the world of Oros. It's about things that happen that you weren't expecting. It's like you wandering in the world and just wanting to gather your food or something, and then some predator comes out of nowhere and attacks you, and then some Udam comes out and starts attacking the predator, and all this chain of events that starts to happen. So it's really about this crazy kind of chaotic world. So for that for us was really the identity of the Far Cry game that we were making. In this case it's Far Cry Primal, but yeah.
What about the language? Is it based on the real research, or I mean, how do you come up with 2 or 3 brand new languages?
Well, actually, with the language that you'll hear in the game, that one we worked really closely with Andrew and Brenna Bird, who are linguists that work at the University of Kentucky. And it's actually based off a real language, which is Proto-Indo-European. And we worked with them to sort of develop 3 different variations of that language for the 3 tribes, because they're very different. Some of them are more primitive, and some of them are a lot more advanced. So we actually worked with a real language with real specialists to feel to make it feel authentic while you're walking around in the world, because they quickly realized when they did the first tests, actually it was with a sort of simplified English that the characters would be speaking. It's like, me, man, food, want. It kind of didn't really work that well for us, so we wanted to push something more authentic, and that's why we went with Proto-Indo-European.
How historically accurate are the weapons in the game?
Well, we looked at that at the time back then, and we saw that it was actually the invention of the bow was around that time. So we sort of built it up from that. So we have the bow, we have the spear, we have the club. You can have different bombs, like oil that does fire, like sort of fire bombs, and bee bombs as well. So you have all sorts of different variety of weapons. But really what we put our focus on, and what we thought was the best weapon that you could use, was the animals, like the saber tooth and all that, because you're using them constantly to sort of take down enemies, tag them and all that. So they're really your ultimate weapon, and you get to complement that with bows and flammable spears and all sorts of things like that.